and everything else. Looking good?
Yeah, I think it's recording. We'll see.
Sweet. What time do I need to be done?
6.
6? Okay. I'll try to manage. I'll try to manage time.
All right, let's settle down a little bit here first. All right. Anybody that don't know this guy, this is Colby Trow. He owns Bossy Creek Fly Fishing up in Harrisonburg. He was one of the original, actually the original youth member of Fly Fishers of Virginia. Nat Gwynn, our founder, brought him and his brother Brian in, and
31 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. It was, this hall.
Yeah.
This hall. So, all right, Colby's going to tie one of Nat's favorite flies, the
Some frogs.
Yeah, Dalberg diving frog and just a deer hair frog. Super effective patterns. Just absolutely, largemouth, smallmouth, pickerel, everything loves frogs. So it's a great fly. So he'll tie the fly, talks a little bit about how to fish him and all like that. So
Yep.
have at it.
Thank you. Well, I brought some really cool stuff too. We'll talk about the fly, the construction, the materials, all that stuff. But I've had some folks over the years dropping off some of Nat Gwynn's fly tying materials. So I just pulled out of the bag. I had a bag here from Orvis that I opened up, and it says April 7th, 1993. And I don't think it's ever been touched before. So in Nat's fly tying stash, he had a lot of his feathers pre-graded for the specific tails that we use. So we're going to use some feathers off of a saltwater size cape, and you see how they're splayed like that. When you pull these diving frogs, the way that the head is constructed, it's deer hair. This material's hollow. So it's naturally buoyant. So it'll just sit right in the surface film. Well, when you strip it, the water hits that head right there. Can y'all see that?
Yeah. Keep it
and it'll take the fly down, and you can kind of vary how deep it goes with how big and how steep the angle of that head is, and then it'll naturally float right back up to the surface. So the legs also, when you pull, will go, they'll pull together, and it really does, with the legs up front too, gives a really good silhouette of a frog pattern. So everybody likes fishing topwater flies, river smallmouth, largemouth, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we'll use, something with a big popper head on it to push water or to make a little bit more noise or commotion to get those fish interested. I really like the frogs because you can make some noise with them, but you can also do a nice long slow pull, and it's real subtle. And if you're floating down a river system and you're casting at the banks or you're casting at structure, a lot of times when we're fishing topwater in the summer, we'll splat the bug down, and we might even let it dead drift a little bit before we twitch or wiggle it or pop it. If the water's really clear and the bass are really big, sometimes they don't like a lot of commotion or a lot of big popping noise. They'll see that bug, they'll come up and they'll sip it off the surface like a big brown trout eating a dry fly. And that's one of my favorite ways to fish. But if you're not seeing a lot of damselflies and dragonflies flying around the surface, and you're not seeing a lot of surface activity from bass eating stuff or jumping out of the water, so it might be a little early in the day, might be a little cooler, these diving frogs are excellent because you can cast them to the bank or the structure, and you can fish or swim them off the bank 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, pick them up, and then drop them back down. Whereas a popping bug, you're kind of relying on that either initial plop into the water, or after it's drifted down a little bit, giving it another pop or two. And so really big fish, small fish love these, but the really big fish, like in the James River, in the New River, in the Shenandoah, they love frog patterns. It's warmed up enough now that they've all started to kind of come out and become available. And so you don't see a lot of diving patterns outside of maybe like a Sneaky Pete, you know, with a cork-shaped head that's kind of designed to slide or not make a lot of motion or dive down. Deer hair is a very versatile material. If you take care of it and you glue it and treat it properly, it can actually withstand a lot more fish and a lot more damage and a lot more abuse than a lot of your cork flies will. Even if you have epoxy over your cork flies, bang them on a rock, you can chip it, paint comes off, you can damage the fly. I've got deer hair bugs. I don't even know how old they are, but I have to keep sharpening the hooks on them. And you know, every year if I'm like, man, that one lands great, it never keels over to the side, it just fishes well, you know, I can clean it up a little bit. I can reapply some Flex-Cement glue, that kind of stuff, to kind of revitalize it, and it goes back in the box for the season. And some of the ones, I mean, if you tie them really well, or even if you buy them commercially like these Umpqua swimming frogs, a lot of them are in some of the raffle prize boxes back there, or the auction boxes. If you ever buy these commercially, even if you don't tie flies, it would be in your best interest to buy some Flex-Cement, some Flex Seal. This is kind of a robust style rubber cement. And if you take it and you coat the entire bottom of the fly, and you can even put it over the eyes, just don't try to get it on the rubber legs. Coat the entire head, not the stuff back here. It'll increase the longevity of that fly almost indefinitely. After you fish one of these a day, if it's untreated, sometimes the deer hair will start to spin or twist or get it kind of out of kilter, and maybe your fly's not landing and or swimming properly anymore. So get some Flex-Cement and treat your bugs, and they'll last a really long time. So we're going to tie this guy here. Depending on how much time we have, I might be able to get to a second one, just to show you guys a little bit different style. But you see how the colors are layered on here. We've got a color on the bottom and a couple colors on top. So we're going to stack our deer hair. Instead of a traditional spin it around the hook and pack it back, we're going to do a color on the bottom, a color on top, a color on top of that, a color on top of that, mash it back, and then repeat until the fly is done. And it'll give you a really dense, very floatable, very abuse resistant kind of head on it. So this has got a lot going on. The one thing I'm not going to do is put this flash on the tail. Usually if I have to buy these because I've run out, I'll actually tear a lot of that flashaboo out. It can sometimes foul, and it can sometimes get in the way of the legs. And if the fish are really picky, sometimes they're coming up and looking at that. I think they overdress some of the commercial flies with too much flash. So a lot of times right out of the box, first thing I'll do is I'll rip that out. So I didn't bring any. We'll put a couple rubber legs back there, maybe with the tail. I'll show you how to, first thing we'll do is the weed guard. The very first step, if you're going to add a weed guard to a fly, is we're going to start with the weed guard, and then the last thing we do is finish with the weed guard, because it'll go from the back and then tie in at the front. Show you some tricks on how to get the rubber legs in on the side, and then put the eyes on, kind of finish everything up. So as I'm kind of going through, y'all are welcome to ask any questions. I have two different types of tying thread here. Actually, the hook, this is a Tiemco 8089. So it's a stinger style bass hook. It's been around for probably 40 years now. A lot of the commercially tied, actually all the commercially tied Umpqua flies that are deer hair are tied on either the stainless or the bronze 8089. So it's a good saltwater hook too for stripers and stuff like that. It's a little bit thinner wire than say like a Gamakatsu B10S, which we use for a lot of our bass flies as well. But good solid hook, good hook point. The thread I'm going to start with is just flat wax nylon. typical thread that we use for a lot of our bass flies, crayfish flies, any trout streamers. It lays flat. It's got a lot of good strength to it. It's a 210 denier. But for our deer hair work, it's a little bit light, especially if we're stacking layers of hair. You can spin deer hair with flat wax nylon if you're doing like a muddler minnow or something like that. It's strong enough. If you're spinning smaller deer hair bugs, you can probably get away with it. But gel spun thread, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's for applying maximum pressure. If I wrapped this around both my hands and tried to break it, it would cut into my hands before I could break it. It's really good, but it's also real silky. Because it's multi-strand, it doesn't cut the material. You're putting this deer hair under a lot of pressure. If you use Kevlar thread, something that's kind of a single strand that's really strong, it'll actually cut and tear your deer hair as you're tying the fly and putting it together. So you can tie the whole thing with gel spun, but since it's so expensive, I usually do my weed guard, my tail, everything, and then I'll tie it off, stop, glue everything, and then I'll put my gel spun on when I get to my deer hair work. So since we're going to be stacking deer hair and doing layers, and as you can see, this guy's got chartreuse on the bottom. We're going to do a white belly and do kind of more of a natural colored frog. We have to separate the bottom hair from the top hair, and there's a trick when we put our weed guard on. I'm going to show you guys how you can make, instead of having a round hook to tie on, we're going to make a little bit of a flat base or a flat plane by putting the weed guard, the nylon weed guard material. This is from the fly shop in Redding, California. So it's probably about as old as I've been using this Mason hard stuff since I was a kid. I bought so much of it, I still have a ton of it. But that hard Mason nylon is what I'm going to use for my weed guard. And you'll see how I put it on. I'm going to run the weed guard down both sides of the hook, so I create a little bit of a flat plane, and that'll help your deer hair fibers to separate. And so unlike spinning deer hair where you want a nice bare hook that's slick to spin your deer hair, this whole thing's going to be covered in thread in this nylon. So it doesn't really matter where you start. You can start up towards the eye. I'm just going to lay a base of thread down. See which of my scissors my kids have not destroyed. And can y'all see I'm coming down the actual bend of the hook? Yep. I'm going to come down about halfway, and then I'm going to come back up. Because the weed guard's going to follow the natural bend of that hook down. And then, if y'all can see that weed guard there, it comes down, follows the natural curve of the hook, comes down, and then comes up front. And it's stiff enough to carry the weight of that fly over a log or a branch or weeds. And you're floating down the river, don't be shy. If there's a big log or something laying out between you and the bank, that 3 or 4 feet between that log and the bank might be where that fish is. Go right for the bank. Fish it. If you hook the fish, worry about landing the fish later. You can get your fly to hop over that log and not get hung up all the time. So I'm going to give myself a pretty generous piece of weed guard material, and what I'm going to do is actually double it over. My dad's a dentist, and I fortunately have never damaged my teeth. But what I'm going to do is come back up near the front, not all the way. I don't want to crowd the eye with my deer hair, so I'm leaving a little more than 1/8 of an inch without any thread, and I'm gonna put this weed guard, I'm gonna leave a little bit, and I'll turn the vise in a second to show you guys what I'm doing. If it'll focus there, You see how each piece of monofilament is riding straight down the side of the hook. So now I have a nice little flat plane, and I'm going to take that all the way back, and you can kind of manipulate it and flatten it out, because at first it'll want to twist on you a little bit. And I'm going to come back to about the point of the hook, and I'm going to get rid of the one side that will not be my weed guard. And if you want any material that you're ever tying with to ride straight down the hook, ride the top of the hook, the best thing to do is hold it up at an angle and just tie with a little bit of pressure. And you can kind of guide it left or right, but I'm not having to do much except for hold it here. And you see how it just went straight down the spine of that hook. And then I'm just literally going to leave that little annoying piece of weed guard out of the way until the fly is completely trimmed and done.